in the late 18th century, in the rugged landscapes of the Eastern Cape. South Africa. A young woman named Sarah Baartman was born into the Khoikhoi community. This indigenous group, known for their rich culture and close connection to the land, nurtured Sarah during her early years. Unbeknownst to her, Sarah's life would soon take a tragic turn, transforming her into a figure whose story would echo across centuries, a powerful symbol of resilience, injustice, and the enduring fight against prejudice. Sarah's physical appearance was unlike anything the European world had seen before. She was born with a natural and distinctive feature called steatopedia, which meant she had a pronounced curvature of the hips and buttocks. Within her community, this was a sign of beauty and fertility, a source of pride and identity. But in a world gripped by colonial attitudes and racial stereotypes, Sarah's body was misunderstood, objectified, and exploited in ways that stripped her of her humanity. At just 16 years old, Sarah's life changed forever. Caught in the grip of colonial expansion, she was taken from her homeland and thrust into a world where she would be displayed as an exotic spectacle for the curiosity and entertainment of others. Her story is not just one of personal tragedy, but a reflection of broader historical injustices, a reminder of how individuals and cultures were dehumanized during a time of imperialism and racial discrimination. Today, as we revisit Sarah Baartman's story, we do so with respect and empathy, shedding light on the harsh realities she faced and honoring her legacy. Her life invites us to reflect on the importance of dignity, human rights, and the ongoing fight against racism and exploitation. By sharing her story, we contribute to a deeper understanding of history, one that recognizes both the pain and the strength of those who came before us. If you want to learn more about untold histories and stories that matter, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Join us as we explore remarkable lives and uncover truths that inspire change. Your support helps us keep these important conversations alive. Do not forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Together, let us honor the past and build a more compassionate future. Sarah Baartman's body carried a feature that was both a blessing and a curse. A natural gift deeply rooted in her heritage and yet tragically misunderstood beyond her homeland. This feature, known as steatopedia, is a genetic condition characterized by an accumulation of fat deposits around the buttocks and hips, resulting in a pronounced and voluptuous figure. Within the Khoikhoi culture to which Sarah belonged, this distinctive shape was not only common but celebrated, representing beauty, fertility, and vitality. It was a symbol of health and an emblem of femininity, admired and embraced by her community as a natural expression of womanhood. In their eyes, such curves were a source of pride, reflecting a close harmony between body and nature, a living connection to their ancestral identity and traditions. However, when Sarah was forcibly removed from the familiar landscapes of South Africa and brought to Europe, her body became something entirely different, an object of fascination, misunderstanding, and exploitation. The very trait that symbolized beauty and strength in her culture was grotesquely misinterpreted through the distorted lens of European colonial attitudes, steeped in racial prejudice and ignorance. Instead of respect or admiration, Sarah's figure was met with curiosity mingled with condescension and cruelty. The Western world at the time was dominated by rigid ideals of beauty and race, ones that favored Eurocentric standards and viewed any deviation as abnormal or exotic. Sarah's body, with its natural fullness and curvature, was seen not as a celebration of life but as a spectacle to be dissected, studied, and displayed. In the early 19th century, Europe was captivated by freak shows and exhibitions that showcased people who were deemed unusual or different, often stripping them of their dignity and humanity for public amusement and profit. Sarah, under the cruel moniker Hottentot Venus, was thrust into this world where her physical attributes were commodified and objectified. Forced to wear revealing costumes that accentuated her curves, she was displayed in cages before paying audiences who gawked at her as if she were some exotic creature rather than a human being with thoughts, feelings, and a history. The irony was bitter. In her own culture, her body was a source of respect. Yet in Europe, it became a tool for dehumanization, a visual justification for the racial stereotypes that sought to place African people beneath their colonizers. This cruel treatment was compounded by the scientific racism prevalent among European scholars at the time. Scientists and naturalists obsessed over Sarah's body, measuring and dissecting her in an attempt to prove theories that categorized humans into hierarchies based on race. Georges Cuvier, a prominent French anatomist, infamously used Sarah's physique to support his claims of racial difference, comparing her features to those of primates and perpetuating the false narrative that African people were closer to animals than to Europeans. Such pseudoscience lent a veneer of legitimacy to the oppression Sarah endured, reinforcing the social systems that allowed people like her to be stripped of rights and dignity. Despite all the humiliation and suffering she faced, Sarah's story also reveals the profound resilience of a woman caught in the merciless tides of history. Though her life was marked by tragedy, the very fact that her name and story have survived centuries is a testament to her enduring legacy. Sarah Baartman's figure, once exploited as a symbol of otherness, has since become a powerful emblem of resistance against racism, sexism, and colonial violence. Her body tells a story not only of suffering but of identity, survival, and the reclamation of humanity in the face of systemic dehumanization. The story of Sarah Baartman challenges us to rethink how societies define beauty and humanity, urging us to move beyond narrow, exclusionary standards that have caused so much pain and injustice. It reminds us that the meanings we assign to bodies are deeply cultural and contextual, shaped by history, power, and perspective. What one culture venerates, another may disparage. And in this tension lies the possibility for greater understanding and empathy. As we reflect on Sarah's life, it becomes clear that her story is not just about the past. It resonates profoundly with contemporary conversations about body positivity, racial justice, and the fight to honor the dignity of every individual. Her experience forces us to confront the ways in which prejudice can warp perceptions and justify cruelty, while also inspiring us to celebrate diversity and affirm the beauty in all forms. Through remembering Sarah Baartman and telling her story with honesty and respect, we honor not only her life, but also the countless others whose histories have been erased or twisted by the forces of oppression. In doing, we take an important step toward healing and building a more inclusive, compassionate world where every person's body and identity are valued and respected. At the tender age of 16, Sarah Baartman's life took a devastating turn that would forever alter her destiny. The peaceful rhythms of her early years, rooted in the traditions of the Khoikhoi people and the rolling landscapes near the Ganges River, were shattered when colonial forces expanded aggressively into her homeland. Dutch settlers, seeking to establish control over the rich lands of South Africa, clashed violently with indigenous communities, and Sarah's own family was caught in the crossfire of this brutal expansion. It was during this turbulent period that her partner, a man who had been her companion and the father of their child, was tragically killed by Dutch colonists, leaving Sarah vulnerable and alone in a world that was growing increasingly hostile to her people. This loss was only the beginning of a cruel chapter in Sarah's life. As Dutch colonial influence tightened its grip, the systems of exploitation and control grew more ruthless. At a time when the institution of slavery was firmly entrenched as both a political and economic engine for European powers, Sarah found herself caught in the web of human trafficking that swept many indigenous people from their homes and families. With few protections and little power, she was forcibly taken, sold into slavery, and transported to Cape Town, far from the familiar landscapes and the community that once defined her existence. In Cape, Sarah's life became one marked by servitude and suffering. She was placed under the control of Peter Willem Cesar, a Dutch colonist who owned her as property, and worked as a servant for his family. Yet even amidst the hardships of slavery, Sarah's distinctive figure did not go unnoticed. Her body, shaped by the natural trait of steatopedia, drew attention and fascination in a way that she neither sought nor desired. To the European settlers who saw her, Sarah was transformed from a young woman with a story and identity into a spectacle and exotic curiosity to be gawked at and exploited. What followed was a period of increasing objectification and control, as Sarah was paraded and exhibited for the amusement and profit of others. The cruelty of her captivity was amplified by the growing obsession with her physical appearance. Her curves, once a symbol of cultural pride, became a commodity, and she was subjected to dehumanizing displays that treated her as less than human. These exhibitions were not just acts of entertainment, but served to reinforce the colonial worldview that positioned African people as inferior, different, and available for domination. Sarah's capture and forced removal from her homeland were emblematic of the wider experience of many indigenous and African people during the height of European colonialism. Families were torn apart, cultures were suppressed, and lives like Sarah's were reshaped by forces far beyond their control. Yet, her story stands out because of the intense scrutiny and exploitation she endured, highlighting the intersection of racial prejudice, gendered violence, and the commodification of black bodies. Through it all, Sarah's humanity persisted, even if it was often denied or erased by those around her. Her early life, filled with loss and upheaval, set the stage for a journey marked by resilience amid unimaginable hardship. As she was moved from one place to another, from Cape Town to the stages of London and Paris, the echoes of her youth, the love she lost, the community she left behind remained a silent testament to the person behind the spectacle. This chapter of Sarah Baartman's life compels us to confront the harsh realities of colonialism and slavery not as distant historical facts but as lived experiences that shaped real people. It urges us to remember the individuals who were caught in these systems of oppression, to see beyond the labels and dehumanizing portrayals, and to acknowledge their stories with the dignity they deserve. By understanding Sarah's capture and the loss that precipitated it, we gain deeper insight into the complexities of her life and the broader historical context that made such tragedies possible. It is a reminder of the enduring impact of colonial violence and the importance of honoring those who endured it with empathy and respect. As we continue to explore Sarah Baartman's story, it becomes clear that her journey from a free young woman in South Africa to a captive exhibited across Europe is not just a tale of suffering, but also a powerful narrative about identity, resilience, and the struggle for humanity in the face of dehumanization. This story invites us to reflect on history's shadows and challenges us to ensure that such injustices are never forgotten or repeated. After being forcibly taken from her homeland, Sarah Baartman found herself in the bustling port city of Cape Town, a place worlds apart from the familiar landscapes and rhythms of her childhood. Here, in a society dominated by colonial power and racial hierarchy, she was thrust into the harsh reality of servitude, assigned the role of a servant in the household of Peter Willem Cesar's family. Sarah's days were filled with demanding labor and limited freedoms, a far cry from the life she had known. Yet, even as she navigated the hardships of her new existence, there was something about her that captured the attention of those around her, a physical presence that could not be ignored. Sarah's unique body shape, defined by the natural trait of steatopedia, became the focus of curiosity and fascination among the European settlers. In the context of her culture, her figure was a sign of beauty and fertility, but in Cape Town, it was viewed through a completely different lens. The colonial mindset, steeped in racial stereotypes and exoticism, transformed Sarah's body into an object of spectacle. Instead of being seen as a woman with her own story and dignity, She was reduced to her physical attributes, becoming a subject of both admiration and mockery. It was not long before Sarah's presence began to draw crowds. Word spread about the curious woman with the pronounced curves, and she was increasingly exhibited to onlookers eager to witness something they considered extraordinary. The curiosity that surrounded her was a double-edged sword. While it brought attention, it also stripped her of privacy and autonomy. She was treated less like a person and more like a living exhibit, displayed for the amusement and profit of others. The societal fascination with Sarah's body was part of a broader pattern during this era, where individuals who deviated from European norms were often commodified and dehumanized. Freak shows and exhibitions were popular forms of entertainment, capitalizing on people's desire to see the exotic and unusual. For Sarah, this meant being paraded before paying audiences, forced to wear revealing costumes that accentuated her curves, and subjected to invasive scrutiny. The line between fascination and exploitation blurred, leaving her vulnerable to the worst excesses of colonial curiosity. Despite the degrading circumstances, Sarah's story is not solely one of victimhood. Her experience in Cape Town also reveals the complexities of survival and resistance within oppressive systems. Navigating a world that sought to control and define her, Sarah maintained her identity and dignity as best as she could. The attention she garnered, though exploitative, inadvertently laid the groundwork for her eventual move to Europe, where her life would become even more entangled with the forces of colonialism and spectacle. Sarah's time in Cape Town highlights the painful contradictions of her existence, a young woman celebrated for a feature that was a source of pride in her own culture, yet objectified and commodified in another. It serves as a poignant example of how bodies, especially those of black women, have been historically politicized and controlled, stripped of their humanity for others' gain. Her story urges us to reflect on the deep-seated prejudices that shaped colonial societies and continue to influence perceptions today. As we follow Sarah's journey from Cape Town to the stages of London and Paris, it becomes clear that the fascination with her body was just the beginning of a much larger story, one of exploitation, resilience, and the enduring struggle to reclaim identity in the face of dehumanization. Her life challenges us to look beyond the surface, to honor the person behind the spectacle, and to recognize the lasting impact of colonial histories on individual lives. By understanding the circumstances that led to Sarah's public display in Cape Town, we gain important insight into the intersections of race, gender, and power that defined her experience. This chapter in her story is a crucial step in unpacking the broader narrative of colonial exploitation and the ways in which black bodies have been scrutinized, commodified, and marginalized throughout history. Remembering Sarah Baartman's time in Cape Town is not just about recounting historical facts. It is about acknowledging the resilience of a woman who, despite being stripped of freedom and dignity, left an indelible mark on history. Her story invites us to engage with uncomfortable truths and to commit ourselves to a future where such injustices are never repeated. After the unsettling chapter of her life in Cape Town, Sarah Baartman's journey took a darker and more tragic turn as she was transported across the seas to Europe, a place where her fate would be shaped by exploitation and spectacle on an unprecedented scale. In London and later Ireland, Sarah was thrust into the harsh spotlight of public exhibition, cruelly branded with the dehumanizing name Hottentot Venus. This name, a twisted reference to her Khoikhoi heritage and the Roman goddess of love and beauty, served as a stark reminder of how her identity was being reshaped and manipulated to fit the exotic fantasies and racial prejudices of European society at the time. In the early 19th century, the fascination with curiosities and freak shows had reached a fever pitch across Europe. These exhibitions thrived on the public's morbid curiosity about bodies that deviated from the European norm, whether due to physical differences, disabilities, or ethnic origins. For Sarah, this meant being reduced to a living spectacle. Her body displayed in ways that emphasized her natural steatophagia as something extraordinary and otherworldly rather than a normal part of her cultural identity. She was made to wear revealing costumes that left little to the imagination. Her curves no longer a symbol of beauty, but a source of voyeuristic fascination and ridicule. Sarah's exhibitions were not mere displays. They were performances designed to captivate and shock audiences. Crowds paid to see her, some drawn by a mix of fascination, fear, and prejudice. The cruel irony lay in the fact that the same natural features that her community celebrated became the reason she was subjected to such degrading treatment. Audiences often treated her less as a person and more as an object, an exotic curiosity to be gawked at, mocked, and exploited for profit. The stage where Sarah stood was not a place of honor but a cage of humiliation, trapping her in a world that denied her dignity and agency. Her exploitation in these freak shows was deeply intertwined with the broader context of European colonialism and racial ideology. The exhibition of Sarah Baartman served to reinforce the false and damaging narratives that Europeans created about African people, narratives that portrayed them as primitive, hypersexual, and fundamentally different from Europeans. By placing Sarah on public display, these shows perpetuated stereotypes that justified the oppression and subjugation of entire populations under the guise of scientific curiosity and entertainment. Sarah's life in London and Ireland was marked by a profound loss of freedom and humanity. Despite her youth and resilience, she was trapped in a cycle of public spectacle and private suffering. Her exhibitions were accompanied by invasive scrutiny from doctors, scientists, and the public, all eager to study and measure her body in the hopes of finding evidence to support racist theories. This scientific gaze stripped Sarah of privacy and respect, treating her as a specimen rather than a person. The conditions of her captivity were harsh, and the psychological toll immense. While the crowd saw only the surface, Sarah endured the pain of isolation and exploitation. Her story highlights the intersections of racism, sexism, and colonialism, showing how black women's bodies were often the battleground for competing forces of power and prejudice. Through it all, Sarah's experience challenges us to recognize the human cost behind the spectacles of history. Yet, even amid such dehumanization, Sarah's story is one of endurance. Her presence in London and Ireland brought uncomfortable truths to light about the cruelty of colonial attitudes, the exploitation embedded in popular culture, and the resilience of those who suffered under these systems. By remembering Sarah Baartman, we confront a painful past but also honor the strength and dignity that survived despite it all. Her exhibitions in Europe became a symbol of the injustices inflicted upon countless others, whose voices were silenced by history. Sarah's life invites reflection on how society treats those who are different, and how curiosity can cross into cruelty when it is not tempered by empathy and respect. It is a call to reject the dehumanization of others and to acknowledge the shared humanity that binds us all. As Sarah's story unfolds from the streets of Cape Town to the crowded halls of European freak shows, it reveals a narrative of exploitation, but also a testament to the enduring spirit of a woman whose life continues to resonate. Her legacy challenges us to learn from the past and to strive for a world where no one is reduced to a spectacle because of who they are. In the midst of her captivity and growing exploitation, Sarah Baartman was presented with what appeared to be an opportunity, a contract that promised travel and performance under the care of a ship's doctor named William Dunlop. This contract, its surface, seemed to offer a chance at a new life, perhaps even a return to her homeland after a period of 5 years. Yet, beneath the formal language and promises lay a web of exploitation and deceit, a trap that would ensure Sarah's continued suffering far from the land she once called home. Sarah, who was unable to read or write, signed this contract without fully understanding the consequences. Coming from a culture that did not use written agreements in the same way, she likely trusted those around her, unaware that the document was designed to benefit her captors far more than herself. The contract outlined her role as a household servant and entertainer, allowing her to be exhibited in public shows in England and Ireland, with the claim that she would receive a share of the earnings. However, the reality was starkly different. The vague and misleading terms gave those controlling her almost unlimited power, and there was no real mechanism to ensure that Sarah's rights or well-being would be protected. Once she set sail for London, Sarah entered a world where her agency was further stripped away. The contract became a legal shield for her captors, allowing them to justify her continued exploitation as a performance under supposed consent. But Sarah was far from a willing participant in these shows. She was trapped in a system that commodified her body and denied her freedom. The promises of a return to South Africa were never fulfilled, and she was effectively held captive on foreign soil for the rest of her life. This contract and its exploitative nature exemplify the broader abuses that characterized colonial systems, where individuals, especially those from marginalized groups, were coerced or deceived into agreements that perpetuated their oppression. Sarah's situation was made all the more cruel by the fact that she was kept under constant public scrutiny, her body displayed as an object of curiosity, while the legal framework around her provided no real protection or recourse. The story of Sarah's contract also highlights the ways in which power was wielded through language and law, tools that were used to legitimize injustice and silence dissent. It is a stark reminder that legal documents and official promises can mask profound inequalities and exploitation, especially when one party holds all the power and the other is vulnerable and uninformed. Throughout her time in England and Ireland, Sarah's life under this contract was marked by isolation and humiliation. She was paraded in exhibitions that drew large crowds eager to witness the Hottentot Venus, yet her own voice and experiences were ignored or erased. The so-called contract made it easier for her captors to dismiss her as a willing performer, rather than a victim of human trafficking and abuse. Despite the constraints imposed by this exploitative agreement, Sarah's story survived the centuries as a powerful testament to the injustice she endured. Her experience under this contract sheds light on the human cost behind colonial spectacles and challenges us to question the systems that allowed such exploitation to persist unchecked. Reflecting on Sarah Baartman's contract and the betrayal it represents deepens our understanding of how colonial powers manipulated individuals through legal and social means, maintaining control through deception and coercion. It urges us to recognize the importance of consent, agency, and justice in all forms of human interaction, lessons that remain relevant today. Sarah's story, framed by this exploitative contract, is not just a historical footnote, but a vivid illustration of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systemic injustice. It calls on us to honor her memory by acknowledging the wrongs she suffered and committing ourselves to a future where no person is subjected to such exploitation. Through remembering her journey, we affirm the dignity and humanity that were so long denied to her. In the cruel theater of her exploitation, Sarah Baartman was subjected to a treatment that stripped her of dignity and reduced her to a mere spectacle for public amusement and colonial fantasy. Forced to wear revealing costumes that left little to the imagination, she was displayed in cages, confined like an exotic animal rather than recognized as a human being with feelings, thoughts, and a story of her own. This treatment was not only a profound violation of her physical autonomy, but also a deliberate act designed to dehumanize and commodify her body, turning her into a curiosity and a sexual object for the entertainment of others. The costumes Sarah was made to wear were often tight-fitting and scanty, emphasizing her natural curves which had already attracted unwanted attention. These garments were not chosen by her but imposed by her captors, who sought to accentuate her stetopedia and present her body as an oddity to be stared at, dissected mentally, and fetishized. Such displays were orchestrated with the intent of feeding European audiences exotic fantasies, appealing to their sense of superiority while simultaneously provoking fascination and desire. Sarah's body was manipulated to fit a narrative that portrayed her as both wildly different and hypersexual, reinforcing racist and sexist stereotypes prevalent in colonial societies. The cages in which she was placed served as a chilling symbol of the extent to which she was stripped of freedom. Far from being a place of safety or dignity, these enclosures were tools of control, meant to emphasize her captivity and spectacle. Visitors paid to peer inside, treating Sarah as an object on display rather than a person with rights and emotions. The very act of placing her in a cage sent a powerful message about her perceived status, one that aligned her with animals or curiosities rather than with fellow human beings deserving of respect and empathy. Sarah's treatment was compounded by the social and scientific context of the time. European colonial powers were deeply invested in pseudoscientific theories that sought to classify and rank human beings according to race, often positioning Africans at the lowest levels of this fabricated hierarchy. Sarah became a living exhibit of these racist ideas, her body scrutinized by doctors, scientists, and artists who used her features to promote harmful myths about racial difference and inferiority. Her revealing costumes and public displays were part of a larger system that sought to objectify black bodies and justify colonial domination through scientific racism. The sexualization of Sarah's body was especially damaging. The emphasis on her curves was intertwined with long-standing stereotypes that portrayed black women as hypersexual and available, a damaging trope that fueled exploitation and violence. Sarah's forced public exposure and the invasive attention it drew were violations of her privacy and personhood, reflecting a deeply entrenched system of racial and gendered oppression. Her experience serves as a stark reminder of how black women have historically been denied control over their own bodies, subjected instead to the voyeuristic and exploitative gaze of others. Despite the immense cruelty of her treatment, Sarah's story has endured as a powerful symbol of resilience and the struggle for dignity. Her forced display in revealing costumes and cages exposes the brutal realities faced by many who were dehumanized under colonial rule. It challenges us to recognize the human cost behind what was presented as entertainment, and to confront the legacies of racism and sexism that continue to affect society today. Sarah's experience also invites reflection on the broader history of how bodies, especially those of marginalized groups, have been used and abused as tools for power and control. It pushes us to consider the ways in which public fascination can turn into objectification, and how empathy and respect must be central to how we view and treat others. Her story is a call to honor the dignity of all people, regardless of difference, and to reject the systems that perpetuate exploitation and dehumanization. By remembering Sarah Baartman's forced exhibitions, we are reminded of the importance of confronting uncomfortable truths about history and society. Her life was marked by suffering and injustice, but it also speaks to the enduring strength of a woman who, despite being stripped of freedom and dignity, left a lasting legacy that challenges us to do better. In telling her story, we not only acknowledge the wrongs of the past, but also affirm our commitment to a more just and humane future where no one is reduced to a spectacle or treated as less than human. After enduring years of exploitation and public display in London and Ireland, Sarah Baartman's tragic journey took another harrowing turn when she was sold to a French showman named Riaux. This transfer marked a new chapter in her life, one that plunged her deeper into a world where she was treated less like a human being and more like an exotic animal to be paraded for the entertainment of Parisian audiences. In the bustling city of Paris, Sarah found herself confined once again, this time in menageries, the popular traveling exhibitions that combined elements of a zoo and a circus, where the rare, the strange, and the foreign were exhibited for public curiosity and profit. The menageries were venues designed to thrill and shock, places where Europeans sought to experience the unfamiliar and the exotic from faraway lands. For Sarah, being displayed in these menageries meant living in a cage, her every movement controlled and directed by her captors. She was made to perform on command, forced to sit, stand, and dance for the amusement of audiences who saw her not as a person but as a spectacle, an object of both fascination and dehumanization. This treatment was a brutal extension of the exploitation she had faced in Britain. amplified by the cold indifference of the French showman who prioritized profit over her dignity and well-being. Locked in a cage next to a young rhinoceros, Sarah's existence in the menageries symbolized the depth of her dehumanization. She was literally placed alongside animals, reinforcing the racist colonial ideologies that sought to deny her humanity and portray African people as closer to beasts than to civilized human beings. This positioning was not accidental. It was a deliberate act designed to emphasize her perceived otherness and to make her a living symbol of European dominance over colonized peoples. Her captivity in Paris was marked by harsh conditions and relentless objectification. The trainers and handlers who managed her performances treated her with little compassion, expecting her to behave like trained animals, responding to commands with no room for autonomy or refusal. Sarah was made to wear only a simple loincloth, a garment that barely covered her, further exposing her body to the invasive and often leering gazes of the audience. The scant clothing and forced performances heightened the sexualization of her figure, turning her into a subject of eroticized spectacle rather than an individual with her own identity and story. This period of Sarah's life also coincided with the rise of scientific racism in France, where prominent naturalists and anatomists took a particular interest in her body. Her presence in Paris caught the attention of men like Georges Cuvier, a leading zoologist, who sought to study her physique in the name of science. Sarah was subjected to invasive examinations and measurements, often without consent, her body dissected mentally and later physically in ways that reflected the dehumanizing ideologies of the time. The so-called scientific scrutiny further stripped her of humanity, reinforcing the narrative that she was an object for study rather than a living person. Despite the cruel conditions and relentless exploitation, Sarah's story did not end in silence. Her life in the Paris menageries became emblematic of the broader horrors inflicted by colonialism, a stark illustration of how racism and imperial power operated to control and degrade black bodies. Her experience invites us to confront the uncomfortable truths about the past, recognizing the deep wounds left by systems that valued profit and spectacle over dignity and justice. Sarah's confinement alongside animals and her forced performances reveal the extent to which colonial society sought to erase her humanity and impose a narrative of otherness and inferiority. Yet, even in this dehumanizing context, Sarah's resilience shines through. Her story calls on us to remember not only the pain and injustice she endured, but also the strength of her spirit in the face of overwhelming adversity. By tracing Sarah Baartman's journey from the menageries of Paris back to her homeland, where her remains were eventually returned and honored, we gain insight into a legacy of suffering that demands acknowledgement and reflection. Her life challenges us to reject the ideologies that dehumanized her and to commit to a world where every person is treated with respect, dignity, and compassion. Sarah's time in the Paris menageries stands as a powerful testament to the brutal realities of colonial exploitation, but it also serves as a catalyst for conversations about race, identity, and human rights that continue to resonate today. Remembering her story is essential not only to honor her memory, but also to learn from history's darkest moments and to work toward a more just and empathetic future, where such cruelty can never be repeated. When Sarah Baartman's tragic story reached the hands of French scientist Georges Cuvier, it marked a chilling moment in the history of science and racism, one that would echo far beyond her lifetime. Cuvier, a leading zoologist and anatomist of his time, was fascinated by Sarah's body, not as a person with her own identity and dignity, but as a specimen to be dissected and studied in ways that reinforced the deeply racist ideologies dominating European thought in the early 19th century. His interest was not purely scientific curiosity, but part of a larger effort to legitimize racial hierarchies through pseudo-scientific methods that dehumanized black bodies and justified colonial oppression. Cuvier's examinations of Sarah were invasive and humiliating, carried out under the guise of advancing scientific knowledge, but driven by a desire to prove that Africans were closer to animals than to Europeans. He and his colleagues measured and documented every aspect of her physique, focusing obsessively on her steatopedia and other physical features that were distorted and interpreted to fit racist theories. In his writings, Cuvier went so far as to compare Sarah's anatomy to that of apes and other animals, a blatant attempt to place her and, by extension, African people at the lowest rungs of a fabricated evolutionary ladder. This cruel comparison was more than just a personal insult to Sarah. It was a cornerstone of scientific racism, a movement that used distorted science to rationalize discrimination and exploitation. Cuvier's work was widely respected in European intellectual circles, which meant his dehumanizing conclusions about Sarah carried significant weight, fueling stereotypes that justified slavery, segregation, and colonial violence for generations. The impact of these pseudo-scientific ideas extended beyond Sarah's lifetime, influencing racial attitudes well into the modern era. Despite the veneer of respectability that Cuvier's scientific status provided, his treatment of Sarah's body was marked by a profound lack of empathy and respect. He disregarded her humanity entirely, reducing her to a collection of physical traits to be analyzed and displayed. After her death, Cuvier arranged for Sarah's body parts, including her brain and genitalia, to be preserved and exhibited in jars at the Musée d'Ilhomme in Paris, where they remained on public display for over a century. This grotesque posthumous exhibition was a final act of objectification, denying Sarah the dignity of a proper burial and continuing her exploitation even after death. The scientific community's acceptance and promotion of Cuvier's work reflect the broader societal attitudes of the time, where racial prejudice was codified through institutions and scholarship. Sarah's body became a symbol used to perpetuate myths of racial superiority and inferiority. Her lived experience erased in favor of a narrative constructed by her oppressors. The dehumanization she suffered under the guise of science is a stark reminder of how knowledge can be weaponized to justify cruelty and inequality. Yet, amid this dark chapter, Sarah's story also reveals the resilience of truth and memory. Over time, activists, scholars, and communities challenged the racist legacies embedded in scientific racism, advocating for the recognition of Sarah Baartman's humanity and dignity. The eventual return of her remains to South Africa in 2002 was a powerful act of restitution and respect, symbolizing a collective effort to confront past injustices and honor her as a person rather than a specimen. Cuvier's study of Sarah Baartman, while a disturbing example of scientific racism, also serves as a cautionary tale about the ethical responsibilities of scientists and the dangers of dehumanizing others for the sake of knowledge. It prompts reflection on how prejudice can infiltrate even the most respected fields, and the importance of ensuring that science respects human dignity above all else. By examining this painful episode, we gain insight into the mechanisms of oppression and the ways in which racism has been embedded in systems of knowledge and power. Sarah's story encourages us to question accepted narratives, challenge injustice, and strive for a world where every individual is valued for their inherent humanity. Remembering how Georges Cuvier used Sarah's body to promote racist ideas is essential not only to honor her memory, but to understand the broader historical context of racial discrimination. It is a call to acknowledge past wrongs and to commit to a future where science and society uphold the principles of equality, respect, and justice for all people. In 1816, Sarah Baartman's life came to a tragic and premature end at the age of just 26, a conclusion to a story marked by exploitation, dehumanization, and profound suffering. The exact cause of her death remains unclear, lost in the shadows of history. But what we do know is that her final years were defined by hardship and isolation, far removed from the freedom and dignity she deserved. Her death was not just the end of a life, but a symbol of the countless individuals whose stories were silenced or distorted by the forces of colonialism and racism. Sarah's health had been fragile for some time, a consequence of the harsh conditions she endured in captivity. Speculation about the cause of her death includes illnesses common at the time, such as pneumonia, syphilis, or smallpox diseases that thrived in environments marked by neglect and poor sanitation. Yet, beyond these medical possibilities, the physical and psychological toll of being confined, exploited, and constantly objectified cannot be underestimated. The relentless pressure of public display, the loss of personal freedom, and the absence of basic human care undoubtedly contributed to the decline of her well-being. Despite the obscurity surrounding the exact circumstances of her death, Sarah's passing did not bring her the peace or respect that any human being deserves. In a final indignity, her body was seized by Georges Cuvier, the French scientist who had studied her during her lifetime, and dissected for further analysis. This posthumous treatment extended the cruelty she faced in life, denying her the dignity of a proper burial and continuing to reduce her to a mere specimen in the eyes of the scientific establishment. For more than a century and a half, Sarah's remains were displayed at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, preserved in jars and plaster casts, a haunting reminder of the ways colonialism and scientific racism sought to objectify and control black bodies. This public exhibition was a grotesque extension of the spectacle that had defined Sarah's existence, a symbol of how dehumanization can persist long after death. It was only many years later, in 2002, that Sarah's remains were finally returned to South Africa, where she was laid to rest with the dignity and respect she had been denied for so long. This repatriation was the result of sustained efforts by activists, scholars, and political leaders, including Nelson Mandela, who saw the return as a vital act of healing and justice. The ceremony coincided with South Africa's Women's Day, a poignant tribute linking Sarah's life and struggles to broader themes of empowerment and human rights. Sarah Baartman's death and the treatment of her remains highlight the profound injustices inflicted on her throughout her life. Her story is not just a historical footnote, but a powerful testament to the human cost of colonial exploitation and racial prejudice. It reminds us of the necessity to honor the dignity of all people, and to confront the legacies of oppression that continue to shape our world. The ambiguity surrounding Sarah's cause of death serves as a metaphor for the many silenced voices of history, individuals whose suffering has been obscured or ignored. By acknowledging this uncertainty, we open space for reflection on the ways in which marginalized lives have been erased or distorted, urging us to recover and respect their stories with care and compassion. Sarah's premature death invites us to consider the broader context of health and well-being in situations of systemic abuse. It underscores the vital importance of human rights, adequate health care, and the protection of vulnerable populations from exploitation and neglect. Her life and death challenge us to build societies where no one is reduced to an object or denied their basic humanity. In remembering Sarah Baartman, we are called to honor not only her resilience, but also the dignity that was denied to her. Her story teaches us about the costs of prejudice and the urgent need for empathy, justice, and respect for all people. Though her life was cut short and shrouded in suffering, her legacy endures as a powerful reminder of the human spirit's strength and the ongoing struggle for equality. Through this reflection on Sarah's death, we confront uncomfortable truths about the past and present, motivating us to create a future where every individual's life is valued and protected. Her story, marked by tragedy yet also by remembrance, continues to inspire movements for social justice and human rights across the globe. Following Sarah Baartman's untimely death in 1816, the cruelty that had marked her life did not cease, but instead transformed into a haunting posthumous spectacle that would endure for over a century and a half. Her body was seized by Georges Cuvier, the French anatomist whose fascination with her physique had dehumanized her while she was alive, and was subjected to dissection and preservation in a manner that epitomized the worst excesses of scientific racism. Instead of receiving the dignity and respect due to any human being, Sarah's remains were turned into objects of public curiosity, displayed in jars and plaster casts at the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, where they remained on view until 1974. This prolonged exhibition of Sarah's body parts was emblematic of a time when colonial attitudes and racist ideologies were deeply entrenched in European society and institutions. The public display served to reinforce harmful stereotypes about race and human worth, using Sarah's body as a tangible symbol to propagate ideas of black inferiority and animalistic traits. Visitors to the museum were invited to gaze upon her preserved remains as if they were artifacts, reinforcing a narrative that stripped her of personhood and turned her life into a cautionary tale of otherness and subjugation. The decision to display Sarah's remains for so long was not only a scientific choice but also a political one, reflecting the broader power dynamics of colonialism that sought to control and dominate non-European peoples through both physical conquest and cultural representation. By exhibiting her body, institutions in France and beyond legitimized the notion that people like Sarah were curiosities, lesser beings whose bodies could be dissected, measured, and displayed without regard for consent or dignity. This practice dehumanized countless individuals and contributed to the normalization of racial discrimination in the social consciousness of the time. For many years, the presence of Sarah Baartman's remains in a public museum was a source of pain and controversy, especially for those who saw her as a symbol of the injustices inflicted upon African peoples during the era of slavery and colonization. Her continued display was a stark reminder of the lingering legacies of exploitation and racism, an enduring insult that echoed the indignities she suffered in life. This injustice became a rallying point for activists, scholars, and communities who called for the repatriation and respectful burial of her remains. The movement to end the public exhibition of Sarah's body gained momentum in the late 20th century, coinciding with broader global efforts to confront the histories of colonial violence and to seek restitution for those wronged by these systems. In 1974, after decades of criticism and pressure, her remains were finally removed from public view, marking an important step towards acknowledging the harm done and beginning the process of healing and reconciliation. However, the removal of her remains from display was only the beginning of a longer journey towards justice. It took many more years of advocacy before the French government agreed to return Sarah Baartman's remains to her homeland in South Africa. This act of repatriation, completed in 2002, was a powerful acknowledgement of the wrongs committed against her and a symbolic restoration of her dignity. Her reburial in the Eastern Cape, on Women's Day, carried profound significance, linking her story to the ongoing struggle for equality, human rights, and recognition of African heritage. The history of Sarah Baartman's postmortem treatment exposes the dark intersections of science, racism, and colonial power. It forces us to reflect on the ethical responsibilities that come with scientific inquiry and the dangers of dehumanizing others under the guise of knowledge. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the ways in which institutions can perpetuate harm when they fail to honor the humanity of their subjects. Remembering the public display of Sarah's remains is essential not only to honor her memory, but also to understand the broader cultural and historical context that allowed such injustices to persist for so long. It challenges us to confront the uncomfortable legacies of colonialism and racism that continue to shape societies today. Her story calls on us to advocate for respect, dignity, and human rights, ensuring that no one else is subjected to similar indignities. Through reflecting on Sarah Baartman's life and death, including the prolonged exhibition of her remains, we gain vital insights into the importance of empathy and justice in how we treat each other. Her legacy reminds us that behind every historical injustice are real people with stories that deserve to be told with honesty and respect. By honoring her story, we commit ourselves to a future where all individuals are valued and human dignity is upheld without compromise. In 2002, after nearly 2 centuries of unimaginable suffering and indignity, Sarah Baartman's remains were finally repatriated to her homeland in South Africa, bringing a long overdue closure to a painful chapter in history. This act of returning her body was much more than a mere physical relocation. It was a powerful symbol of dignity restored and resistance against centuries of racial exploitation and dehumanization. For the people of South Africa and many around the world, Sarah's proper burial represented a heartfelt acknowledgement of the injustice she endured and a commitment to honor her memory with the respect she was denied during her life and long after her death. The journey to repatriate Sarah Baartman's remains was not easy. It required years of persistent advocacy by activists, historians, and political leaders who recognized the importance of righting this historical wrong. Among those who championed her return was Nelson Mandela, South Africa's first democratically elected president, who personally appealed to the French government to release her remains. This effort was emblematic of a broader movement to confront the brutal legacies of colonialism, slavery, and racism, ensuring that victims like Sarah are remembered not as curiosities or objects, but as human beings worthy of dignity and justice. When Sarah's remains were laid to rest in the Eastern Cape province, the ceremony was imbued with deep symbolism and healing. It took place on August 9th, which is South Africa's Women's Day, a day dedicated to celebrating the strength, resilience, and contributions of women throughout history. This timing underscored the significance of Sarah Baartman's story as one of both suffering and survival, reflecting the struggles faced by countless African women under colonial rule and the ongoing fight for equality and human rights. Sarah's burial was a moment of reclaiming her identity and heritage, restoring her place not just in history books but in the hearts and minds of her people. The ceremony was attended by community members, activists, and leaders who came together to honor her life, mourn her suffering, and celebrate her enduring legacy. In returning her to the land of her birth, South Africa reclaimed a piece of its history that colonial powers had tried to erase. Her story resonates far beyond the borders of South Africa, serving as a powerful reminder of the human cost of racial exploitation and the urgent need to challenge the prejudices and injustices that persist today. Sarah Baartman's life, death, and eventual repatriation compel us to reflect on how history is told and who gets to tell it. Her journey exposes the harm caused when people are reduced to stereotypes or scientific curiosities, stripped of their humanity for the sake of others' gain. At the same time, her legacy inspires resilience and hope. It reminds us that even in the face of profound injustice, the human spirit can endure and demand recognition. The return of Sarah's remains to South Africa was not only an act of restitution but also a declaration that such exploitation and dehumanization will no longer be tolerated. It is a call to acknowledge past wrongs while striving to build a more just and compassionate world. As we reflect on Sarah Baartman's story, we are reminded of the importance of empathy, respect, and the pursuit of justice in all aspects of our lives. Her life challenges us to confront difficult truths and to listen to voices that history has too often silenced. By honoring Sarah, we honor the countless others whose stories deserve to be heard and whose dignity must be defended. Thank you so much for watching and joining me in remembering Sarah Baartman's life, a story of suffering, strength, and ultimately, dignity restored. If you found this video meaningful, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and share to help keep these important stories alive. Together, we can raise awareness and foster understanding across cultures and generations. Wishing you all a peaceful and restful night. Sleep well, and I will see you in the next video.